Hey there everyone, and welcome to your video on topics 3.6 through 3.8. We're going to be talking about age structure diagrams, total fertility rate, and human population dynamics. So this is very much a largely binary kind of unit in that we're going to be talking about more developed countries and less developed countries. You need to have a very concrete idea of what those things are. You have industrialized nations with high average incomes per person, and of course high is relative, but even let's say in the United States, some of the poorest people in the United States are still have more resources and are better off than those who live in less developed countries. So just be familiar with general areas and tuck a few away in your head. You know, United States, Japan, Canada, Australia, European countries. Pay attention to the resource use. We have less than 20% of the world's population, but we use at least 70% of the world's resources. Given that we don't take up as much mass as, say, China and India, you have to think that a lot of those resources come from other countries. And then when you have less developed countries, you can kind of put them into two groups. Things like China, places like China, India, Brazil, Thailand, and Mexico. And then your low, least developed countries are going to be in parts of Asia like Bangladesh, but then largely African countries like Nigeria, Congo. Haiti is a Caribbean country, a part of the island of Hispaniola. So just tuck some of these away and do pay attention when things are classified as being developed, more developed and less developed, or developed and developing. That's another name for them. All right, so let's go ahead and flip to page 189. Let's see. Okay. What is an age structure? Sorry, trying to do this without it being all wavy. Distribution of individuals among various age groups. Please make sure that you're familiar with the three stages. Pre-reproductive, which is about 0 to 14. Reproductive, which I believe is like 15 to 45, 49, somewhere in that range. And then post-reproductive is 50 and over. How does the size of one of the three categories defined in question 2 influence the overall size of a population in the future? Give 2 examples we've got right here. The size of a population will likely increase if it is made up mostly of individuals in their reproductive stage or soon to enter that stage. Obviously, if the majority of your population is fertile, you're going to end up growing rather quickly. In contrast, the size of a population dominated by individuals in their post-reproductive stage will tend to decrease over time. The classic examples of that in terms of countries are Japan and Germany. If you take a look in your packet, there is a four age structure diagram illustration that not only shows the 4 main shapes you need to know, but also lists sample countries that you can go ahead and tuck away in your head. In an age structure diagram, into which 2 main groups are individuals sorted, that would be male and female, and then which 3 categories. We've got those there. Let me go ahead and turn to page 214 and see if that's where all of the detail is. So here we are again, age structure. Yeah, here are the ages, perfect. Pre-reproductive is 0 to 14, reproductive is 15 to 44, sorry about that, and post-reproductive is 45 or older. On the national exam, they're not going to have you split a hair quite that fine. So let me go ahead and take a look. Sorry for the shadow, by the way. I've been trying all sorts of different arrangements of lamps, and it's just, yeah, so there it is. All right, so let's see. Look at the first graph in figure 8.10. So this is pretty much the graphic that you have in your notes packet. So the first figure is this one right here. Note the graph is simply 2 bar graphs assembled separately and then turned on their side and pressed together. We talked about that in class. You absolutely need to know these 4 shapes. Here you have a classic pyramid with a fat bottom. That means that everybody is either in the reproductive stage or getting ready to be there. So this is a country that within the next couple of years is going to expand rapidly. You can see some examples here. Expanding slowly is when you kind of, your pyramid starts to become a column. Stable is where it's virtually a column all the way up and down. You have the same number of people coming in as you do permanently leaving. And then declining is where you're going to have fewer young people than you do old people. It's almost an inverted pyramid here. There are some subtle distinctions, I will tell you, on the national exam. They're not going to make it so that you have to, again, split those hairs. It will be very obvious what they're talking about. Now, one of the things I want to talk about in class is some predictions you can make. As an example, this is probably a country that is going to need schools in the near future. If they have schools in their country, this is one that's going to need a lot of nursing homes and oncologists. An oncologist is somebody who takes care of cancer, and that there are a lot of types of cancers that only appear when you get older because you've lived long enough to actually manifest them. Let's see, demographic momentum. All right, this is a important concept, and it's going to set you up for the age structure, and the demographic transition model. So this is kind of setting you up for that. So right here, the number of births in a country will rise for several decades. All right, countries with a large percentage of people younger than age 15 will experience rapid population growth unless death rates also rise sharply. So this will occur even if women have an average of only 1 or 2 children because of the large number of girls entering their prime reproductive years. So this is true of China and their one-time child policy. It did slow growth, but they still experience growth just because there's so many darn people, and folks aren't dying. Even if you only have 1 person per couple entering a population, if people aren't dying, if they're living longer, your population is still growing. Most future human population growth would take place in less developed countries because of their typical youthful age structure. And these are also places, again, we're going to discuss this in a little bit, where women don't have as many rights, they're not as educated, and so a lot of times their reproductive decisions are not their decisions, and so they end up having children at a younger age, and so they end up having the opportunity to have more children throughout their lifetime. Let's see. What is the result of a longer lifespan and lowered fertility rates in a country? That is where you end up with an age structure diagram right here. Fewer working age adults having to support a larger number of seniors. This is something we're starting to see here in the United States. China's seeing it. Japan is already seeing it for sure. Shortage of workers is problematic. Let's see. Define when the American baby boom took place. So now you're going to learn about the background on that phrase, okay, boomer. So it's right here, figure 8.5. They're having me go back to something all the way back here. Let's see. The baby boom was 1946 through 1964. So this is after World War II. As you can see, our population spiked because, again, soldiers came home and to do what soldiers do, which is you start a family. And this is a time when having 4 people in the family was unremarkable. So it added 79 million people to the U.S. population between 1946 and 1964. Over time, this group looks like a bulge as it moves up through the country's age structure. So imagine something that looks like this, but this part is fat, and then it continues to stay fat as it goes up here. So we now have this chunk of retirees up here who are from this boomer generation. For decades, the baby boom generation has strongly influenced the U.S. economy because it makes up 25% of the U.S. population. That is huge. So they drove the youth market in their teens. Aha, here's the picture. And then now as they leave the job market, they are leaving behind. Look at what's happened. We've gone from a slow growth to now a stable or almost no growth population because of this, because of the baby boomers as they make their way up and permanently out of the of our age structure diagram here in the United States. All right, showed you that. How does a declining human population affect conditions in that country? I'm just going to summarize. You probably do need to read this. This would make a great national exam question. So right here, you have population declines, which sounds like a great idea, unless it happens all of a sudden. So right here, Japan has the world's highest percentage of people age 65 or older, and the world's lowest percentage of people under age 15. So you have fewer adults working and paying taxes, which means everything from schools to roads cannot be funded very well anymore. Again, here, houses are being abandoned and they can't be sold because nobody can buy them. You could demolish them, but then who's going to pay the cost? Figure 8.12 are some problems with rapid population decline. I would tuck a couple of these away and be able to explain them. So make sure you take a look at that. How can a country halt population decline within its borders? The easiest way to do that is to encourage immigration. What impact does the education and empowerment of women have on a population? I think I've been beating this drum for a little while. It is the best way to slow population growth in a country. Right here. Only 30% of the world's girls are enrolled in secondary education. There are a couple of videos that I want to show you as to what it's like to go to school in other countries. Because not only are they going to school, but in a lot of these countries they are the caretaker of the children. They also take care of the house. So they're having to do all of these things right here. For poor women, the only holiday is when you're asleep. So while women account for 66% of all hours worked, they receive only 10% of the world's income and own just 2% of the world's land. Because remember, again, there's still a lot of places where inheritance laws are passed on from father to son. Traditional gender roles. Poor women who cannot read often have an average of 5 to 7 children, compared with 2 or fewer children in societies where most women can read. So we're not talking about calculus. We're talking about simply being able to read and do simple math. Then also that means allowing those women to hold their own jobs. Education and empowerment, a huge impact. So please do make sure that you read all of that, because that was actually on the national exam. It's been on there before. What are the variety of strategies used in family planning? So it is not just birth control. Please remember that birth spacing is important. Because again, if you're not going to school, you may not understand how the reproductive system works. Simply being able to space your children means that that being pregnant again and again and again is very wearing on the body. And in a lot of these countries, every time you go into childbirth, it's potential for your child to die, you to die, or both of you to die. So being able to space your children so that you are personally as healthy as is humanly possible before you get pregnant is a huge thing. So that is a part of this. It's not just birth control and condoms. And adequate family planning does reduce population growth rates for sure. Some of the biggest problems are, of course, religious values. Here, let's see if we can get through this stuff right here. About 40% of all pregnancies in less developed countries are unplanned. Again, you have to realize a lot of women do not have control over their fertility. Whether or not they get pregnant is determined by somebody else. A lot of times it's just flat out lack of access. There is nowhere to go to learn all of this stuff. And then, again, cultural traditions, and just the fact that 1 in 9 children, girls, are married before the age of 14. For a poor family, marrying off a daughter can relieve some financial pressure. It can also create ties between two families that are economically beneficial. Some analysts call for expanding family planning programs to educate men. That is another avenue that can be explored. And we've seen successes. Clearly it's kind of to the detriment of places like Japan and China, but Thailand and Bangladesh have really seen their population growth slow because of family planning. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see. What is the country with the second largest population in the world at present? That would be India here. And there's the economy. 3 factors help to account for the larger families. Poor couples believe they need several children to work and care for them in their old age. Basically, their children are their social security. They don't have bank accounts. They don't have any other means of supporting themselves when they can no longer work. Strong cultural preference again for male children, and then the use of birth control doesn't happen as regularly as it possibly should. Let's see what else, because I'm trying to, this may be a little bit long, so just strap in. What percent of the world's resources are in this country? Let's see if that's been addressed yet. India has 18% of the world's people, but 2.3% of the world's land resources. So, you know, there's not a lot to go on here. So you can see here are some homeless children who are just sleeping out in the streets. Let's see, what is the world's most populous country? China. And in class, we've already talked about the change in the policy from the one-child policy to now the two-child policy. And we talked about unintended consequences. If you do need to remind yourself of that, that is here in the textbook on pages 220 and 221, and then also 222. So please make sure that you read all of that. And do realize again that although there are some places in China that have undergone rapid industrialization and economic growth, almost 500 million people are living in poverty. To put a button on that, there are maybe 350 million people in the United States entirely. So yeah, a lot of folks living without a lot of stuff. Okay, so let's go on to total fertility rate. We're at the 17-minute mark right now, so if you need to take a break between topics, now is a good time. But I'm going to go ahead and press on. All right, total fertility rate. Start on page 209. 209. So, crude birth rate and crude death rate. Crude birth rate is the number of live births per 1,000 people in a population, and crude death rate is the same thing except deaths. Please realize that the word mortality means deaths, and fertility or fecundity refers to births. What is the formula for population change? It's right here. It's not really hard. People in minus people out. Let's see. What is the replacement level fertility rate? And that would be right here, the average number of children that a couple needs to have in order to replace themselves. You can see it's typically 2.1. You can see why it's slightly larger than you might expect. And that is global. Let's see. Is this number consistent from country to country? Obviously not. Where places where you have larger child mortality and infant mortality, that number is going to be slightly larger. It's darn near close to 2 in highly industrialized countries like the United States. Let's see. What is total fertility rate? It's right here. It's the average number of children born to women in a population, however many they will have in their lifetime. You can see the global TFR has dropped a lot from 55 to 2017. However, to halt this, you have got to have your TFR drop to 2.1. Because even if it's slightly higher, with 7 billion people, it's still a lot of folks. Do realize that TFR is higher in developed countries for all of the reasons that we've already talked about. That's linked to poverty, and then again, a lack of education and empowerment for women. So TFR fluctuates wildly from place to place. What happens when a country's TFR is larger than its replacement level fertility? Your country grows. What if the opposite is true? Your country shrinks. The trick is to do it so that you don't end up having, again, a sudden lack of resources, especially, like human resources in terms of not having enough young people to do the work that needs to be done. Take a look at page 210 for some math connections. We're going to do that in class. But let's go ahead and take a look at United States, which is the third largest country, and is the third largest by a much, much smaller margin. You're talking about billions of people to 325 million. The difference between 1, 2, and then 3 is just huge. What is the current population is stated in the book. That number is going to be slightly different, but that is a number. You don't have to do it for this quiz, but before your test, you need to tuck that number away. 325 million is good enough for right now. What is its TFR? Just take a look right here. Well, that's 57. But right now our TFR is right around 1.8. It has slowed the population, but we're definitely still growing, and it's largely because of immigration and then also an increase in longevity. Your TFR can drop, but your population can still grow because if people aren't dying, you're still adding people to a population. Let's see what else we've got here. Read the section on how immigration has impacted the U.S. population. Note the TFR of the U.S. and predict what will happen to the country's population if immigration is largely halted. Obviously, we're going to experience a decline in the same way that Japan has. So, definitely take a look at this graphic and see how immigration has fluctuated wildly. Obviously, nobody's coming to this country during the Great Depression. But definitely read all of this. You're not going to be asked politically sensitive questions on the national exam, but it also is important for you to understand how immigration does play into the overall population size of the United States. So go ahead and read that on your own. What 8 factors impact a country's average birth rate and TFR? So we've got those right here. Importance of children in the labor force. We don't employ little kids here. So, even if you have a lot, they can't contribute to your family. How much does it cost? Kids are expensive here in the United States. However, we have free school. So it is, but at the same time, they don't enter the labor force. So you can see this is how much y'all cost for 18 years. Availability of pension systems. Again, if you have money to take care of you in your old age, you don't need children to do that. Urbanization. Urban areas have better access to family planning. It's not just that you need kids on the farm. It's just that you don't have the ability to go get any sort of birth control or family planning education. This is the other big one. Educational employment opportunities available for women. Even in urban areas, if women are not allowed to go to school or get a job, they're going to end up having more children. This is a no-duh moment. The younger you are when you get married, the more likely you are to have more children in your lifetime. Availability of birth control methods. Remember, that's not just contraception, that's also spacing. And then religious beliefs. You need to have all of these other things happening, but if your culture tells you that birth control is bad and having lots of children is good, that's what you do because that's what your values tell you is important. Let's see. Define life expectancy. The average number of years a person born in a particular year can expect to live. You can see that we've again gone up from 48 years to 72 years globally. You can see that Japan, this is another reason why they're having a problem. Average life expectancy is 84 years. So that is a big problem, is that young population shrinks. The old population's not going anywhere. So that is where you have the inverted pyramid thing going on. This is amazing to me right here. Poverty reduces the average lifespan by 7 to 10 years. Unreal. Let's see. Does life expectancy vary from country to country? Yeah. What is the single most important factor that impacts... by the way, the life expectancy part, I don't consider that as important as I do total fertility rate, TFR. So it's a number you should have a sense of, but not necessarily have to memorize. TFR globally is, however, kind of important. Let's see, infant mortality rate. It's right here, number of babies that will die before their first birthday. Child mortality rate is how many will die before the age of 5. What is the single most important factor that impacts life expectancy? Again, that is poverty. What is infant mortality rate a good measure of? Basically, conditions in that country. Children, given their size, are going to be the most impacted by things, everything from a lack of food to pollution. It takes less starvation and less pollution to kill a child simply because they have less body mass, and are impacted at a greater proportion than an adult is. They're also developing, so starvation as a child can impact a child or the adult permanently, whereas if you go through starvation for a time as an adult, that is something you can largely recover from. How does infant mortality rate impact TFR? Right here, in areas with low infant mortality rates, women tend to have fewer children because you know that your kids are actually going to make it to adulthood. All right, so we're in the home stretch here. We're at 2537. So now we're going to go on to human population dynamics. We'll start on page 16. All right, let's flip back. Trying to do this in such a way that my little stand doesn't vibrate, so sorry if it does. All right, so learn how to use the rule of 70. I'm going to tell you this right now. This is something we're going to go over in class. Do not worry about the math. So take a look at it and go, okay. Rule of 70 is attached to doubling time, which is how long it takes a population to double in size. You're not going to see this on the quiz. We'll do that in class. Give examples of density-dependent and density-independent limiting factors found in human populations. So this one, probably 191. All right, this is, something that you can do yourself. Disease, lack of resources. The same things for humans as for organisms. So it's the same thing. So go ahead and reread that and familiarize yourself again as to what density-dependent and density-independent limiting factors are. Understand how population density affects the spread of disease. Well, we did the simulation in class, so you should have that under your belt at this point. What one event killed at least 1/3 of the European population in a short amount of time? How did this event occur? So let's see. That's not going to be there. So let's see if it's on page 196. Okay, here we go. Bubonic plague. How did this occur? Transferred to humans by fleas. So it's not the rodents, it was the fleas that is the vector for the disease, because sanitary conditions were poor and rats were abundant. Now we can go ahead and treat the bubonic plague, which is good because it's starting to come back. Where do human populations fall on the survivorship curve? I think we've talked about this already. We're a type 1 late loss organism. Let's see, how many people are currently on the globe? It's right around 7 billion. I'm going to find out the exact number. It's probably like 7.4 at this point. But 7 is a good round number to use if you have to do math on the national exam. Let's see, familiarize yourself with the trends on page 207. I don't know why my voice is doing that. Just kind of take a look at this bad boy right here. We are starting to hopefully, definitely in more developed countries, we have seen our population level off. We're cautiously optimistic that this is starting to level off here. Again, nobody really thinks that we're going to go above 10 billion people, but that's still a whole heck of a lot of folks. Let's see. Figure 8.3, note where most of the world's population growth is occurring. Again, developing countries. On page 208, consider whether or not there is any limit to the growth of the human global population. That is entirely your call. We did a yes and no analysis in class. We talked about Thomas Malthus already. He thought by now we would have had problems. Now you need to be able to describe his theory. He knew that human populations tend to grow exponentially, and in his time, food supplies tend to increase more slowly at a linear rate. This is before there were all of the innovations in agriculture. So for him, it was just a matter of time before we had war and famine and disease spread because we're just flat out going to run out of food. So, read this and think about how you think that's going to work. The biggest thing to remember is that resources are not spread globally equally, and your ability to harvest them is different. Remember, the United States has very few of its own resources. We harvest from other places in the world. So we've created our own carrying capacity for sure. Let's see. Has his prediction come true? No. Why or why not? And again, it's because of the agricultural revolution. We found a way to exponentially increase the amount of food that we can get per unit area, and even grow things in places that we didn't think we could before. All right, cultural carrying capacity. It's something I'll discuss in class a little bit more. It's basically, there it is. Maximum number of people who could live in reasonable freedom and comfort indefinitely. These words right here are different for different places. Think about what you consider to be reasonable freedom and comfort. Now go to a place like Nigeria and ask children your age, they're the same thing. The question becomes, who gets to decide what the cultural carrying capacity is? Let's see. Review the things that influence changes in human population counts on pages 211 through 214. This is all stuff that we talked about already. Remember, this is all from before. So that's 211, 212, 213, and 214. So just take a look at that again. In figure 8.7, let's find figure 8.7. Note different changes over a 100-year period. Do you have to memorize this? No. Should you, on the national exam, have a couple of these tucked away so you can say why it is that our life expectancy has increased and perhaps why our TFR has decreased? I mean, my gosh, look at this one right here. High school graduates for sure. Homes with a flush toilet, sanitation, right there. And remember, an increase in wages also means that you have an increased ability to pay for and access health care, both for yourself as an adult and then also prenatal care to enhance the ability for a woman and her unborn child to make it through pregnancy and childbirth. In Science Focus 8.2, which is right here. Note the different projected populations number for 2050. How are these numbers developed? And how old will you be in 2050? Obviously, I can't ask that on a test, but just kind of think about it. Because one of the reasons I like this class so much is that this is literally something you're going to be dealing with in your lifetime. These are your issues here, all the things that we're talking about. I'm not going to be around anymore. And when you're an adult, you're going to have to deal with the outcome of growing human populations and pollution and climate change and all of that. All of these things are fixable. All of these things are manageable. But you are going to have the knowledge to go ahead and deal with these in a realistic and useful fashion. So again, little PSA, it's one of the reasons why I'm really jazzed about teaching this class. And why it is, I hope that from time to time you kind of step back and look at this stuff and think, how is this going to impact me personally now? And how will this impact me personally when I'm an adult and off on my own and doing my own thing? All right, so anyway, I know that's a lot of information. We're at 33 minutes right now. Hopefully that helps you with this content.